Welcome to the How Humans Work podcast. I am your host, Jeff Z. So glad to have you with us today. We are now in season 3, looking at the nature of stress. We're going to dive into this ancient system and the way it works and plays out in our lives, and talk with some truly amazing people who have knowledge and insights to help us find our way through the dance of life and the dance of stress that will have heart and truth and love in them. It's going to be amazing, I promise. Let's do this. Enjoy. Here we go. Darcy Ottey, welcome to the How Humans Work podcast. I'm so glad to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
For the listeners to know, Darcy and I have a common overlapping, interweaving history in the world of Rites of Passage. And you recently published this beautiful book on Rites of Passage called Rites and Responsibilities, which is a guide for young people about growing up. So I'm really excited to talk about young people growing up in Rites of Passages. What do you love about Rites of Passage work? What's it given to you, and where do you find your love and passion for the work?
I think there's 2 answers to the question, one that's sort of personal and then one that's more general. I think personally for me, I love Rites of Passage because maybe more than anything else, they've been this kind of constant inquiry and study and practice over my life. And so, I was first exposed to Rites of Passage when I was 13. So there's something about following a thread since childhood, since, crossing that passage into adolescence, all the way through now where I find myself in midlife. That's just a deeply rich personal inquiry. How do I navigate transitions, which are invariably awkward and uncomfortable and full of scary mysteries? Can I do that with ever more increasing grace and trust and surrender? So that's kind of personally, I think, what I love about the work and what I love about seeing Rites of Passage, show up in the lives of those that I love and in my community, and that they're an opportunity to bring intention and meaning and shared community focus to recognizing our lives as cycles just like everything else in the world. There's something about that, about honoring the cycles and seasons of the day, the moon, the year, and then honoring the cycles of our lives as humans. That to me is, it's what being human is all about.
Yeah, no, that speaks to me a lot. And I like that idea of honoring the rhythms and the cycles and the way Rites of Passage and honoring transitions. And it's one of the ideas in your book, transition literacy. You have this idea of transition literacy and the way that Rites of Passage give us a kind of fluency to navigate mystery, to navigate change in our development. And it has been for you, it sounds like, that there's a way in which there's a template in the Rites of Passage knowledge and tradition which aids you in your own life journey. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the book was what it was like when COVID-19 first appeared, and, how much kind of, for us today, kind of an unprecedented, very rapid level of transition that affected all humans, or almost all humans across the planet. And we didn't know where it was going and how much change we were going to see and experience. And I just remember in those early days, for me, having had a template of Rites of Passage that I was exposed to, it's oh, okay, I don't actually have to be afraid. I mean, I am afraid. There's, it's a chaotic time and there's a lot that's happening and it's very scary, but it's also a process that that I have blueprints for in my body and in my experience. And I can surrender to that change, as opposed to a lot of what I saw in the media, which was we've got to get back to normal. And it was actually, like, we're a changing species, like, with the issues that we're facing, like there is no normal to get back to, and actually to allow ourselves to go through this transition, as a society may get us closer to where we ultimately want to go. We didn't choose that route, but I like to think that folks, that if we had had a society of initiated adults with templates of rites of passage in their bodies, we actually might have made different choices.
When it first came on, did you see yourself as entering a severance phase where you're like, oh, this is familiar to me, everything's shutting down, things are separating? Did you consciously say, okay, I know the template of initiation and I'm going to go and accept and kind of flow into this idea? I'm in a severance practice right now.
Absolutely. And now we're going into this liminal place, and we're not where we were before, and we're not where we're going to get to yet. We're in the unknown, and it's uncomfortable, and we can't force it. It's just going to have its way with us. I mean, I'm curious, did you also have that same thought go through your mind?
No, I didn't say, I mean, not consciously. I can't remember exactly. What I remember about the pandemic coming on is that everything was changing, everything was uncertain, and that there was a beautiful kind of unity in society and a beautiful kind of creativity when it first came about. People were suddenly broken and disrupted in their normal habit patterns, and suddenly families were hiking together, kids and their parents be like, oh, they're on the trail. Teenagers are with their mom and dad walking down the trail. I didn't see that last week or a month ago, right? So that was sweet. And then there was obviously the profusion of people at home. Like, what do I do with my energy and myself now? What do I do? And all these like inner resources of music and YouTube and comedy and storytelling, all this stuff just started populating society, and memes and all this creativity. So that's kind of like my main memory of those early days. And so I didn't see so much the severance consciously, but I definitely experienced it.
Yeah, interesting.
Like I didn't put that word on it. It's funny, but it was happening. It was a whole kind of like dying away and a separating. And for me, my practice as an acupuncturist just went boop, all the in-person stuff, which is, so, and out of that creativity, I actually started this podcast. I was like, in the summer of 2020, I'm like, I need to do something. I need a way to move forward. And what came to my mind one day when I was sitting at a beautiful lake, it's one of my favorite lakes up outside Lake Tahoe. It's called Angora Twin Lakes. And I was there, and it was in my mind clear. I'm like, I need to interview 10 people and talk with them about their father stories. Yeah. So I want to stick with this love thing a little bit longer. And I want to stick with this idea that rites of passage, this core structure, as I understand it, of severance, being in the liminal or in-between phase, and then eventually a return, is a kind of archetypal pattern or a template at which we, if we learn to speak the language of, and we learn to inhabit and accept and work with, it changes how we dance our way through the journey of being alive in all the different dimensions. Yeah? Is that fair?
A few things that I would say about that. That framework comes out of the work of Arnold van Gennep, a Belgian anthropologist who looked at rites of passage around the world and looking for, themes and commonalities in what made a rite of passage, an initiatory rite of passage, a rite of passage. And he really was the one who named those phases. And I think it's really important to name that and name the legacy in the Western scientific tradition, including in the social sciences, of taking very complex cultures and looking for universalities that often were fantasies of the researchers, and that there have been a lot of anthropologists, or a lot of critiques of his work over the years, and how it was gender biased and Eurocentric and overly simplistic. So for me, all those caveats are really important. And the way I think about it is that threefold model that you're talking about, it's a very powerful training wheels for rites of passage. That is also what many rites of passage today are based on. And I think it is a really useful frame, but I got to put the like caveat on it, because it has a really problematic history also.
I'm curious, since you brought it up, assuming your training wheels are off, how are you holding the template of Rites of Passage? How do you see it now?
For me, that frame stays strong. I'd like to think the training wheels are off, but I think and that I talk a lot in the book, in the kind of later section where I'm really working to support people to call community around them or find their way to a marker of transition. Because one of the paradoxes of the book is, it's a guidebook for how to create a rite of passage experience for oneself, and that's not really possible. And so part of how we do that is by calling community around us. And I do offer that threefold frame. I think for myself, it's an interesting question. It's like what we talked about with COVID. When I find myself confronting a new transition or feeling like, not quite right in my skin, I do start automatically going to the question of like, what needs to be let go of? And I think one of the things that I'm really exploring right now is around what does it look like to really know that it's time for change, and to really know that the roles and structures that I'm in are not fitting, and to be able to move slowly enough with that nothing has to be like the way that I think about it is like no drama. Like, can I do this in a way that creates no drama for me or for anyone else, and find my way into new roles and positions at a pace that my nervous system can handle, and the nervous systems of those around me and the collectives around me can handle.
Mm-hmm. What I hear you saying is that severance is really a limited word. It's pretty dramatic. It's kind of intense and it's sudden. And that there's all sorts of subtle processes or organic relationships that could be available if we attune to them, which don't require drama, but also can be part of the impetus of change. So I think in a way I heard my own answer to the question from what you said, in terms that severance is a kind of strong, intense, masculine word around cutting, demarcating, and not all change actually operates that way. So I think there is a kind of sophistication in that, or an alternative mode which honors the molting process. Like there's some more gradual, there's a more time-based aspect to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about it right now. This is a new thought, but what I've been really working with is right now is, what does it look like to untangle? And so rather than like cut, it's actually like untangling.
I do want to get one thing on the record, which is partly related to our conversation, which is about the initiation, and I didn't complete this, of the pandemic for me. And for my life, it's the first time there's been a global or a planetary, in terms of human culture, initiation into fear. And that was, for me, the teaching around the pandemic was, oh my gosh, everybody really processes fear in many different ways. And yet we all, in our own way, were confronted with fear, either fear of the actual virus or fear of the government responding to the virus, trying to shepherd people through it. But whatever level it was, there was this kind of deep teaching for me around fear. And that I'm actually quite grateful for, because I realized in my own life that I was habituated not to see fear in its in a direct, clear way. I would see it more in terms of thoughts or defenses or perspectives or attitudes or positions. And so I was seeing the consequence of fear in my system, but not actually recognizing, oh, fear was at work that was leading to these attitudes or behaviors. So it was through that and some other work as well where I really started to see fear manifest in my life in a more conscious way.
Well, just, one thing that I'll say that feels connected to that is also a little kind of caveat on what I said about, COVID as initiatory or as a rite of passage. One of my mentors called me to task, someone you might know, Miguel Rivera. Do you know him? He's a LA.
I know of him. I don't know him personally. Yeah.
Yeah, and he reached out to me after I published a blog post, and he was like, "No, Darcy, this is not a rite of passage. This is trauma. In a rite of passage, there are mentors and guides that help support you through, and we don't have anyone doing that for us collectively." And I really appreciated, we had a, really rich conversation about that, about the role of guidance and mentorship and one who has actually made the passage themselves as the supporter, as being an essential ingredient of a rite of passage.
That's really interesting because I'm not sure I agree. And I get where he's coming from and as far as you're representing it, I get this idea that maybe a rite of passage, but there's also all sorts of unwanted initiations in life, right? There's all these events that happen to us that are severance, that are traumatic, which are initiatory in their own way. And I learned that early on in my healing practice, which was that disease is a kind of initiation. When people are confronted with some level of mental, physical, emotional health challenge, whatever it is, that they're not whole and they're not right. And they're sent on basically some kind of journey in a liminal space of oh, how do I work with this particular fact or phenomena in my experience? And nobody is saying, oh, I want to get sick, but sickness itself is initiatory in my observation and in my own experience. So maybe there's a distinction there between what's initiatory and formal rites of passages, or what's that difference? What's that, we're just obviously thinking out loud here together, but what's your response to that? What's the difference or finesse that you would add, given what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting conversation amongst rites of passage practitioners, and I think you'd ask 10 and they'd have 10 different answers. I think some of the frames that really resonate with me, one is Louis Rodriguez talks about echoes of rites of passage. And, an echo, you hear the sound, but it's not the same as the voice speaking. And I appreciate that distinction between a rite of passage and an echo of a rite of passage. Another frame is fragmented rites of passage, ones that contain elements, but it's not the whole thing. It's just a fragment of it. Both of those kind of ways, language to describe it, resonate with me.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Those are subtle, and I still have some curiosity around it. And but I don't want to over focus on this as part of the conversation, because I wanted to come back a little bit to this idea of growing up, right? So some of this template of transitions and these models of initiation or rites of passage, whatever their subtleties are, become a kind of a living language to help us navigate our lives. And one of the things I think we both share is an appreciation for that developmental arc from boyhood, girlhood, childhood into some quality of a practice adult or genuine adulthood through the passage of adolescence. And that's really what your book is guided towards, helping people growing up. Yeah.
It really is that passage. I would say it's really designed to support people on the passage into adulthood, and recognizing, that adolescence is a long time, and actually an increasingly long time in many societies today.
True. Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm in the internal family systems now over the past year, and so I have some questions about the parts of us who are still young, right? This kind of childish or child parts that retain in the soul somehow, or in the conscious psyche or unconscious psyche. But one of the things that kind of caught me is this idea is the death of childhood, and I really wanted to hear you speak about the death of childhood and what your thoughts and feelings are about it. Why is it important that there's some kind of dying to the child self, or the child self dying?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Good. I want to do great questions.
One of the things I think in that section of the book, I tell the story of a young woman in her 20s that I worked with, who was going out on a 3-day, 3-night fasting solo. The night before we were going out, we gathered around a fire, and they had all been invited to bring an item to offer to a fire to really let something go before they crossed the threshold and went out for their solo time. And she brought so many things and was feeding them to the fire, including her her credit card from her dad, because she was still being supported by her family financially. And she offered all these things to the fire, and she held on to her teddy bear, and she was like, I'm not ready to let you go. And so the next day she went out and she crossed the threshold with her teddy bear, took it out on her solo, and then actually partway through her time, she came back into base camp, because that's always, there's always a, you can go out, and if you need to come back, please do. And she came back in and she was like, I need a fire. And we built a fire, and she burned her teddy bear, and then she went back out and finished her time. And, for me, childhood is a time of being cared for, and a time where others are really responsible for meeting your needs. And there's something about mature adulthood, which I am still learning about, right? Because I am very much a product of my culture. But there is something about mature adulthood of, being willing to share your needs with others and take the risk to be soothed and be cared for. But at the same time, to know that ultimately I am responsible for my needs. And that means being responsible for meeting them and being able to express them in a way that others can help me get them met. And I think, that there's so much in the culture that is keeping us hooked to others are supposed to meet our needs, and by consuming more we can get our needs met, that it's hard to really develop the capacity to really be self-responsible. And also the other work of adulthood, and how to make this, appealing is a question, right? In a society that doesn't require us to be responsible for ourselves and for others. It's a hard sell. But both the capacity to care for ourselves and to see our responsibility is to care for the whole. And so for me, there's something in that story of this, young woman really trying to let go, actually, of a parent who was trying to keep her attached by this trickle financially, and holding on to that, and even carrying that out with her, and then coming back and being like, no, I am choosing to let childhood go. To me, that's very powerful and was a huge, marker in her life of responsibility. So, for her life circumstance, that was really important. I would say there's also too many folks who aren't fully cared for in childhood, who aren't safe and who aren't being taken care of. And so I think for those folks, you're talking about our child, parts of us, there's also something about being able to, on our own terms, later in life, say that we're ready for our childhood to be complete, and that can be very healing for those who didn't have that choice in the past or had that stripped from them too soon, I would say.
And so when you say later in life complete, what are you talking about there in terms of what that both might look like in terms of ritual, but energetically, what's it mean to complete? Let's say you had a deficit of a certain kind of care or attention as a young person, and you're later in life, and maybe you're struggling with transition literacy or or something like this, or a passage or a change. What do you mean there?
What comes to mind for me with that is this, recognition that our work in any life stage is never done, right? Because none of us had like the perfect childhood, and life keeps us moving. We keep changing whether we're ready for it or not. And so we're always going back and doing cleanup work, and picking up and caring for parts of ourselves that, we're scared or we're hurt, we're harmed in different ways. Part of the gift of ceremonial work in general is to be able to bring, we act that out all the time with one another, and are responding to, stimulus in the world today based out of what happened to us before. That's the root of trauma work. And so, for me, ceremony is a really powerful way to intentionally go back and kind of gather up those parts of us and say, you're here, and I see you and I'm with you, and I'm over here and I can hold your pain now. And to me, that's part of the self-responsibility of adulthood. For me, it's very specific around my 8-year-old, and the times when my 8-year-old is just terrified and needs to be held. And it's my job as the 45-year-old Darcy to hold her.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think you're making really tangible sense to me around, these parts or these child parts or these hurts, and the sense of the adulting in relationship to our own parts and taking responsibility in a compassionate, conscious, maybe even ceremonial way for what we've lived through and what we still carry. It's interestingly enough, I recently was doing some internal family systems work, and I realized during the course of that session that my whole life I've been becoming the thing that I needed that I didn't get. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. That particular child hurt that was there. I was like, I'm actually, my whole life I've been working to be able to be the thing that I didn't get in that moment, which was really kind of a beautiful self-reclaiming of the arc of my life has been actually a whole healing one, and it made a lot more coherent sense. And additionally, in relationship with somebody I'm close with, had the same story this morning, that there's a certain part in this friend who's had this certain hurt as a child. And then I just asked the question, I said, hey, have you become the person who can actually handle that situation? Have you spent your whole life doing it? And they're like, yes, I actually have. My whole life has been dedicated to partly that becoming process. So I don't know why I'm adding that in. It's just adding dimension to the conversations around what this journey and what these passages are. But I really like what you had to say I'm curious if you have anything that's coming up or a direction you want to push us now, or I should keep leading us forward here.
Yeah, I mean, just with that, I just want to be, I want to be careful because, I really strongly was talking about being self-responsible. And I also really want to recognize, that we live in an interdependent world and that that community is really important and being, our responsibilities to one another to meet each other's needs as mature adults. And that, there's a lot of, there are a lot of very complex, like, how do I want to say it? Like, there's a lot of very complex wounds that people are carrying around. There's a lot of very different needs. And when I like, people also don't have the freedom to meet their own needs in the world today, and they don't have the support to meet them. And so, one of the other things I talk a lot about in the book is like really, speaking to young people about like the issues that they're facing and, sharing the stories that they've shared with me about the challenges that they're facing, and really trying to emphasize like you're not broken, and you're not a bundle of pathologies. And I think there's often a lot of messages from society that it's like to be able to, like, being responsible means like holding it all together, and to hold it all together in our world today is it's kind of like not even, it's not a worthy, it's not possible to really
It's a setup, right? It's a bit of a setup.
It's a setup, and it's not a worthy endeavor. And it's actually just feeding a machine that is, killing many beings on the planet. So, I also want to take care around those concepts like responsibility and maturity. And I try to, get into those nuances in the book.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love that you're saying it. And I think there is a paradoxical component. And I see that theme that this is, hey, here's a frame, but it's a frame. It has limits, but it's good. Paradox, right? Is a book for self-initiation, but you really can't self-initiate. But, here we are, we're in this paradox, right? Like, we're trying to find this ancient connection, but we're really not ancient people, but we are. Paradox, right? And then, so yeah, you need to take accountability, but whoa, you're actually not all at fault for what the shape of the world is in. And if you feel impacted and wounded by that, or you're struggling with that, it's a really good idea not to take that too personally and take that on like somehow you're broken. And it makes me think a lot about like children when their parents are splitting up. Oftentimes they think they're must be me, right? And so as a young person coming into the world, when the culture is a little bananas or distorted or troubled, why wouldn't that same principle also take place? Why wouldn't they also say, what's wrong with me here? So I like that you say that you're not broken, you're not damaged goods, you're not with all some of your pathologies. And I had to do that work a lot through my life in my 20s into my 30s, really to kind of find myself. And so I would just put the question back to you. How did you come to that recognition that, if I take on everything here that's wrong with the culture as if it's mine, that is not good for me or does not do right by me?
I feel like that's a constant struggle. I really, again, to return to my 8-year-old, she learned that in a sort of out of control situation, she like tried to take it all on in her body and like try to control and make a safe surrounding around her by like sheer force of will. And, there's like there's a story my brother tells about this like call from this uptight 8-year-old girl that was like the most uptight child voice that he had ever heard or ever has heard since. That was me, and I can feel how I want to do that. And that I have to grapple with that. And, that was also part of my COVID journey of like, things feel like they're crumbling down around me. And I went into hyper productivity mode, and just like, what can I do to make this all better, and like, and it was not productive and it was not healthy and it was actually destructive for the relationships around me. So I feel like I'm in recovery of what you're talking about, which is probably why, I really wanted to say it to young people. Hopefully at least one will hear that and actually internalize it.
Yeah, no, keep saying it. What else do you feel called to say to young people? I mean, you wrote a 300-page book, which is amazing. Amazing work of
Which is
effort.
the wrong format and wrong length to write up these days. But I had to kind of say it all at once in one format.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And, obviously there's some challenges that come with that format, but I want to stick more with the spirit and the soul of it, rather than the refinement of what it could have been. But, what is it that you want to say? What is it that you feel that you're saying here to young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I have really come to understand over the last several decades is, um, that rites of passage are this like kind of original cultural technology of um, how to be human in a like changing body, in changing relationships, walking through life, and that they were stolen from us, intentionally, methodically stolen because they are inconsistent with a domination-based society, and we see that time and time again. And to reclaim rites of passage in our lives is really radical and really revolutionary, and that it actually can't happen through the will of adults in society because the will isn't there. And so it's actually going to take young people demanding that adults act like adults and that elders act like elders and that they give them their birthright of initiation in order to actually bring them back into our communities at the level that we could see real change.
It's beautiful.
So I'd really ask for young people to demand from their communities that they initiate them and that they do what they need to do to be able to initiate them.
Yeah. And let's say we keep going down that road, the gift of initiation, a young person. If I'm a young person listening to this podcast, I hope they are. I really feel this deep obligation to bring the lives of young people into the conversations and that I have in different ways, but in particularly this one. Let's say they're hearing this and you're like, yes, demand initiation. I don't want to say what to expect or what the goal or that kind of language because it doesn't feel right. But what would you speak to the process of initiation for a young person? Why would a young person want to be interested in it? What would they be given that they wouldn't get if it wasn't there? Off the cuff, you don't have to be perfect in your answer here, but just like, what's that thing that initiation offers a young life? Yeah.
Well, right now I'm thinking about my two godchildren and
Okay.
Lucia and Jackson. Shout out to Lucia and Jackson. I'm actually like wishing, I should have brought one of them on the show with me. And Lucia just turned 13 and Jackson's 17. And both of them have like strong internal commitments to rites of passage. And I'm thinking about what they would say about what it's given them. Lucia, the other day, as we were talking about turning 13, shared about self-discovery and about her experience of having a rite of passage experience last summer, and it really starting her on a journey of self-discovery. I think Jackson would probably say similar things. Both of them would also really emphasize the being in a community of other young people, and what a gift it was to be in a authentic, away from devices journey into nature with other young people, the adventure, the physical challenge. I think those are some of the things that, are interesting and meaningful.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I'm also just thinking about this sense of a recent teaching for me in ceremony is just the gift of having a self and to be in the self, and the wonderful opportunity just to be alive and to have a self and explore it. And I was like, it just became really clear to me. I'm like, whoa, that is such a gift. Why would I treat that in any other way but with the utmost gratitude and respect in terms of myself, having a self? And I was also equally aware that and that can be taken away at any minute. So this weird paradox between the gift of a self and the self-discovery of life, and also the real risk that myself at any time, I can lose it, in terms of this life. And so I think for me, my own answer, or the answer I would start with this question, is that part of what I hear you saying is that rites of passage is a way to be in self, a way to discover and be in places of self that other shapes, other aspects of the culture, and I want to go towards culture, don't necessarily honor, and there's kind of a deprivation. So I think part of my answer, just to join in with your answer, is to say that there's a kind of deep deprivation that the reflection that nature gives us, that the sense of self that we can find in a deep, authentic community, those are so profound and so powerful.
Yeah, I would say yes. And self in relation to other beings, and human and more than human. I think that's also a really important element.
No, I'm with you on that. I think that's beautifully said, and it's beautifully added on to. I think that's so important and so vital to have those moments, particularly in a ceremonial way or in a very intentional way that happens with rite of passage. But one of the things you were saying a minute ago, Darcy, was about culture and the intentional removing or stealing of rites of passage technologies because it doesn't match with a dominating type worldview. And that's very provocative, and I can't say I disagree with it at any level. And it really brings me to this sense that part of the gift of rites of passage and deep healing work is that cultural forms that have toxic energies in them or don't serve one's humanity or a whole class of people or whatever it is, that the beauty of the rites of passage work is actually heals that aspect inside oneself, and there's a restorative aspect to that. But I want to hear just some of your thoughts on culture and some of the healing of culture in relationship to rites of passage, if you'd be willing.
Yeah. My intention in the title of the book, Rites and Responsibilities, was it was a long time for that book, that title, to kind of find me. And I think one of the things in the world of rites of passage that I was initiated into, so I was 13. I had an incredibly powerful experience, a 3-week journey that involved, solo time, these extended backpacking journeys, an incredible group of young people, really caring mentors, beautiful places. and strong ceremonial elements that were rooted in Lakota traditions, but for me, taken out of context and like not sufficiently framed and well held in a way that I could really understand what was happening and my relationship to it. And certainly there wasn't any acknowledgement of, the fact that those ceremonies were illegal for Lakota people to practice until the year that I was born. And that there was I certainly know, like, talking about the history of the Lakota people or what those traditions had to do with the indigenous people of the lands that I was on, in the Pacific Northwest and in Coast Salish territories, or what they meant for me as a, white settler girl growing up in Seattle at the time. And so I think, and at the same time, they fed this amazing, like, powerful yearning inside me. Like, I was a deeply spiritually curious young person for my whole life. And my mom, like, also is very spiritually curious and, like, sort of tried to feed that, but without any kind of frame or container around it. And so that yearning was fairly unfulfilled for me. And this journey, like, really fed that. And I came to understand it as, like, like, this ceremony that I had on the beach was my baptism, and the sweat lodge ceremony that I experienced as, like, really foundational. And then as I grew older and really looking back at those experiences, and learning the term cultural appropriation, and coming to understand, like, oh, that was a textbook case of cultural appropriation, taking traditions, practicing them outside of the context, with a, like, unclear, kind of convoluted permission history. And so I have really come to understand myself as being initiated through cultural appropriation. And, for me, again, to go back to this idea of rights and responsibilities, it is very clear to me that that as humans, shared ceremonial forms are vital. Like, ways of interacting with the ancestors, ways of engaging with the other, the beings and the elements in the world that we share, that step out of clock time and so much of the impacts of daily life. They're fundamental. And I would call them very much a birthright, and part of a healthy culture. And how do we do that in a, in a world that is so messed up and with such like, legacies of oppression and genocide, and differing roles that each of us sit in that context today, with so much ongoing violence as well. To me, a huge part of what Rites of Passage offer is an opportunity to learn to situate ourselves in that story in a way that is not about shaming. I mean, I think this is for me, one of the hardest things about contemporary mainstream conversations about social justice is the way that it's become so binary, and this feeling that like if we actually allow children to be taught history in a way that is accurate, that we're somehow like teaching some kids that they're bad and wrong and shaming them, which for me, that's actually not what it's about at all. It's about like, what's like, what are the rituals? You know, one of my colleagues, Ramon Parrish, talks about the rituals of reconciliation. You know, also Sobi Wing, shout out to Sobi Wing, who made such an impact on this book. And he talks about rites of decolonization. Like, what are the rites, the rituals today that are going to actually help us to hold the complexity of the issues that we're facing, and move to a new place together? And for me, there's something about how, like, the inquiry that I'm really with is, how do our rites of passage into adulthood really get a chance to initiate people into those conversations in ways that move them forward, so that, like, for me as a 13-year-old white kid from Seattle, I've had to overcome this foundational experience of like my most at home spiritual places being traditions that are not that are connected with the harm of my ancestors, not connected with the gifts and the persistence and the survival and the struggles of my ancestors. So for me, that's a big part of my inquiry, is, into ancestral recovery, and what does it look like to really develop relationships with my Quaker settlers, with my ancient Slavic ancestors, in ways that are meaningful.
Is that an active or monthly process for you, or is it just something you cycle through from time to time in terms of, I think you said ancestral recovery, or working with your ancestral lineages?
What do you mean?
I'm kind of curious how you practice, like what the practice of that is in terms of how do you reacquaint yourself with your ancestors in a way that accounts for what you're talking about, that your home, your sense of belonging is in a world that was, I think you said, harmed by your ancestral lineage.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's something like, part of it is about, monthly, seasonal, rhythms, and connecting with the practices of various ancestral traditions. I think some of it is about, how do I bring it into daily life? Part of it is about what relationship, today, like human relationships in my life are, who else is really like on that exploration journey, and how do I stay connected with them, because those relationships help feed the commitment to my relationships with my ancestors. But part of it is about like having an ancestral altar and feeding it, like, often. And I can feel like when I'm not feeding it, that relationship isn't as strong.
Yeah. You said so much in the talk about culture and your rites of passage and the cultural appropriation and the different layers of that. So I'm appreciating all that. And
sorry,
I wanted to return. No, don't be sorry. I'm almost like, I want to make sure I get to the heart of a few things there. One of the threads is this sense of giving young people an opportunity to be in relationship with their lineage and the history, the actual authentic history. And the one I want to actually focus on is this idea of belonging, which is a core kind of outcome, or what happens through a rite of passage is belonging. get the sense that I am in myself. And in my healing work, that's a core struggle I'm always trying to help and support healing, is I think many of us, for many reasons, have trouble accepting our lives as it actually is. And so there's an odds with and a conflict with nature, our own nature, the biological nature, ecological nature. There's just this process that landing and becoming and being the beings that we are is such a actually profound and noble thing, but it's also can be very difficult and challenging at the same time. So this idea of belonging, I think, means a lot, and it makes a lot of sense to me that if we are really going to belong to this world, and we're really going to open up to ceremonies and rites of passages which aid our belonging, that also requires, and I really like the word, situating ourselves in our lives authentically, that it also makes a whole hell of a lot of sense that we have to take responsibility for all of it. Not like responsibility isn't ours, but be in relationship with all of it at a cultural level, including the gifts of survival, but also, as you're saying, the harms. So I wanted to deepen into this area of culture and belonging, and this connection between the work of rites of passage, which situate us, and the cultural challenges that we face. And I want you to run with that in whatever way your heart wants to speak.
I mean, I think a couple of things that come for me in what you just shared. One is, what is it to belong to something worth belonging to, and that it really, to me, that's an important part of belonging, is the feeling that whatever it is that you belong to, that you do belong to it, and that it is worth belonging to. And I think, for me, one of the opportunities, again, I'll speak in particular as a white settler, one of the opportunities for young people who come from a similar background that I do is like to be initiated into a story of redemption. I really think about what is it as a people. I feel that I come from peoples who were both forcibly ripped from their lands, and kind of put in service again to domination. And with that, made really hard and often really bad choices. And sometimes they made really good choices. And I feel it in every choice I make today, seeing the ways that I am complicit and really trying to reckon with that. Again, to go back to what we've talked about earlier, the 8-year-old that thinks that she can do it all, and solve all the problems of the world. It's I can't. I actually have to surrender into the truth of this moment. And there's actually very little that I can do, honestly, on the big global scale of things. What I could do is write this book. That was the clear message for me. Honestly, it felt like from my ancestors was, you need to write this book. And the instructions that I got, it's a very different book than what I thought it was going to be, but just following that line, and it's it doesn't matter if the book's good or bad. It doesn't matter if I like it. It doesn't matter if, hopefully people will read it. But I had to write it because that was what I was told to do. And what happens if we are given the space to really listen, be supported by community, to listen for what we uniquely have to offer to our collective healing, to our collective evolution as a species on this planet, and then show up with those gifts. Yeah, so that's what comes for me with what you brought in.
Beautiful to know that you were guided in some way to write this book. So I like that. And then I'm still thinking about young people here, and I'm thinking about, you write a lot about drugs and sex and rites of passage. I'd just like to get you on record a little bit and have you share some of your high level or core thoughts or stories about why is it important for adults to really consider this, and for young people, what do you think's at stake in that world around what is a really difficult dance in the coming of age process? Is how do I begin to share and be in my body in a pleasurable way? How do I experience different states of consciousness, and under what conditions and what environments?
That chapter was a chapter, one of my collaborators was like, that chapter is going to get you in trouble. There's a lot of parents that aren't going to like that chapter. But mind-altering substances and sexuality are like primary doorways of initiation, and they are really powerful. And, I think it was very interesting to work on this project over, the last 10 years, because culture has been shifting so much over the last 10 years. And so, I felt like I was constantly having to do rewrites to kind of keep a pace with the current conversation, and knowing like as soon as it is out, it's going to be outdated. And I think that's happening. And we see, especially, with the conversation around like therapeutic use of psilocybin and ketamine, and, like just the conversation it's very different than even 5 years ago. And I think the significance of sexuality and mind-altering substances on society in general, it kind of can't be overplayed. Like they're powerful forces, and they are very attractive for young people. For many, not all, but for many young people. And I know for myself that both of those were really important parts of my own growth and development and individuation through adolescence. And I talk about that history in the book. And I think it's really important that tools are put in the hands of young people to begin to make sense of how to navigate that terrain. And it is really risky terrain. A lot of my like really foundational wounds come from my own attempts to make sense of and harness those energies in ways that like met the impulses that I was feeling in my body. And one of the things I talk a lot in the book about is what's happening in the adolescent brain, and the impacts of what's being wired into us by the choices that we make as teenagers, and feeling, in my 20s and 30s and today, the impact of the choices that I made when I was a teenager on how I think now. But the solution isn't to like try to push it away. I think the solution is to like open areas of inquiry. One of the things that I really encourage young people to do, I talk a lot about pleasure. I talk a lot about consent. I talk a lot about connection. And then I also talk about like risk management and like actual like safety, like cost benefit analysis. And that's not necessarily the easiest energy to bring to, the impulses that we're feeling. I feel like at 45, with 30 years of life experience of navigating that terrain, I can just now begin to harness some of that energy, and begin to have some faith in my decision making practice. That's, in large part because of the patterns that I wired into my brain. So, I talk about that, and then I'll just also talk about, I also talk about some of the cleanup work that can be really powerfully initiatory for people, like the process of getting sober. I think that there's many folks, and this is certainly true for me, that one of my most important rites of passage was the rite of passage of getting sober, and it's, there's beautiful community supported ways to do that. And so, I think that all of that terrain is part of the complexity that's worth opening the door to for young people, and then also, again, like putting tangible tools in their hands.
I love the trust and in that, because there is, going towards the taboo is not an effective strategy, and yet it's a real draw, and there's real power to it, and there's real risk. So I appreciate that you spent as much time as you did in it on the book, and that you're willing to address it. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for everything you brought today. Thank you for writing this book. Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been really, really great to talk with you about these things, Darcy.
Yeah, you too. You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining the show today. You can support the How Humans Work podcast by sharing the shows with your people, your family, your friends, your community. And you can keep it ad-free by making a donation to our Venmo at HHW_pod. I appreciate your support. All music is performed by the incredible Chase Jackson at chasejacksonmusic.com. To learn more about our guest, the show, or Jeffrey's work helping people make peace with their human nature, you can go to howhumanswork.us.